There is a quiet power that very few people ever learn. It doesn't come from being louder than others. It doesn't come from winning arguments. And it doesn't come from proving people wrong. In fact, it often looks like the opposite. It looks like silence. It looks like patience. It looks like someone standing calmly while chaos happens around them. Most people spend their lives reacting to everything. Someone says something disrespectful, they react. Someone criticizes them, they react. Something goes wrong, they panic. But the people who truly control their lives understand something different. They understand that reaction is often a form of weakness, because the moment you react emotionally, you give control of your mind to the situation. And once someone can control your emotions, they can control your actions. Stoic philosophers understood this thousands of years ago. They believed the strongest individuals were not the ones who fought every battle. They were the ones who knew which battles were worth their attention and which ones were not. In this video, you will discover the ancient Stoic principle known as the art of not reacting. You will understand why calm people always seem to have more control over their lives. You will learn how to think clearly when emotions rise. And most importantly, you will begin to see situations differently. Situations that once triggered anger will start to feel insignificant. Moments that once caused stress will begin to feel manageable. Because when you master your reactions, you begin to master your mind. And when you master your mind, you begin to master your life. But before we go deeper into this philosophy, if you enjoy videos about Stoicism, discipline, and building a powerful mind, make sure to subscribe to the channel. This channel is dedicated to exploring timeless ideas that help you become calmer, wiser, and mentally stronger in a chaotic world. Now let's begin with something most people never question: the real reason why they react to everything. Imagine the situation. You're having a normal day. Nothing special. You're working, scrolling your phone, or simply talking with someone. Then suddenly, someone says something that feels disrespectful. Maybe it's a sarcastic comment. Maybe it's criticism. Maybe it's an insult. Within seconds, something changes inside your mind. Your heart rate increases, your thoughts start racing, and suddenly, you feel the urge to respond immediately. You want to defend yourself. You want to prove them wrong. You want to say something that puts them back in their place. But if you pause and observe carefully, you will notice something interesting. The situation itself is actually very small. It's just a few words, just a moment. Yet inside your mind, it feels enormous. Why? Because your mind immediately attaches meaning to what happened. You interpret the comment as disrespect. You interpret the situation as a threat to your identity. You interpret the moment as something that requires a reaction. But the Stoics believed something very important. They believed that events themselves are neutral. What disturbs us is not the event, but our interpretation of it. Think about that for a moment. Two people can experience the same situation and react completely differently. One becomes angry, the other stays calm. One feels insulted, the other laughs it off. The difference is not the event. The difference is how the mind interprets the event. This realization is incredibly powerful, because if your interpretation creates your emotional reaction, then you have more control over your emotions than you realize. One of the most powerful insights in Stoic philosophy is the idea that there is a small space between what happens and how we respond. Most people never notice this space. Events happen, and they react instantly. But disciplined individuals train themselves to notice this gap, that small moment where they can pause and think. In that moment, something important becomes possible: choice. Instead of reacting automatically, you can decide how you want to respond. And this decision changes everything. Because when you react emotionally, your actions are controlled by impulse. But when you respond calmly, your actions are guided by wisdom. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself of this idea. He wrote in his journal that people should always remind themselves, you have power over your mind, not outside events. When you understand this deeply, something begins to change. Situations that once triggered strong emotions begin to feel less powerful, because you realize that the true power lies not in the event, but in your response. Think about the most composed person you know, someone who rarely loses their temper, someone who seems calm even when things go wrong, someone who does not react impulsively. There is something about that kind of person that naturally commands respect, not because they dominate others, but because they dominate themselves. When people react emotionally, they reveal something about their internal state. They reveal that their emotions are stronger than their discipline. But when someone remains calm under pressure, they communicate something very different. They communicate control, and control is a form of power. This is why calm individuals often influence situations more effectively than emotional ones. Their stability creates trust, their patience creates clarity, and their silence often carries more weight than loud reactions. Most people don't realize how much energy they lose through constant emotional reactions. Every argument, every frustration, every moment of anger, all of these reactions consume mental energy. Over time, this creates exhaustion. You become mentally tired, emotionally drained, and easily triggered. But when you practice the art of not reacting, something different happens. You begin to conserve your energy. You stop wasting attention on things that do not matter. You stop carrying unnecessary emotional weight. And slowly, your mind becomes lighter, clearer, more focused. This is one of the hidden benefits of Stoic discipline. It frees your mind from unnecessary emotional chaos. The Stoics had a simple but powerful way of viewing difficult situations. Whenever something happened, they asked themselves two questions. First, is this within my control? Second, if it is within my control, what is the most rational action I can take? And if it was not within their control, they simply accepted it. Not because they were passive, but because they understood that fighting reality only creates more suffering. This mindset allowed them to remain calm, even in difficult circumstances, because they focused only on what they could actually influence and ignored everything else. One of the most powerful habits you can develop is something extremely simple: a pause. Not a long pause, sometimes just a few seconds, but that pause can change the entire direction of your life. Most people live in a constant state of reaction. Something happens, and they immediately respond emotionally. A message arrives that feels disrespectful. They react instantly. Someone challenges them. They react instantly. A situation becomes stressful. They react instantly. But this instant reaction rarely leads to wise decisions, because emotions move faster than logic. When something triggers you emotionally, your brain enters a defensive state. Your body releases stress hormones. Your heart rate increases. Your breathing changes. Your mind begins focusing on defense instead of clarity. In this state, the brain is not designed for wisdom. It is designed for survival. And survival responses are often impulsive. That is why people say things they later regret. That is why arguments escalate quickly. That is why relationships break over small moments of emotional reaction. But the Stoics trained themselves to interrupt this process. They practiced the discipline of pause. When something triggered them, they did not respond immediately. They gave their mind time to settle, time to think, time to observe the situation clearly. This small delay often made the difference between chaos and wisdom, because when emotions calm down, clarity appears, and clarity allows you to respond with intention instead of impulse. The Stoics believed that every moment of emotional tension contained an opportunity, the opportunity to practice self-control. And each time you successfully pause before reacting, you strengthen your mind, just like a muscle becoming stronger through exercise. Why silence is often the strongest response. Modern culture often teaches the opposite of Stoic wisdom. It tells people that they must always defend themselves, always respond, always prove their point, always win the argument. But if you observe life carefully, you will notice something interesting. The people who constantly argue rarely gain respect. In fact, they often lose it, because arguments fueled by emotion rarely create understanding. They create more conflict. The Stoics understood that silence can be one of the most powerful responses available. Not passive silence, not fearful silence, but deliberate silence. The kind of silence that comes from self-control. Over time, this habit creates a quiet authority. People begin to see you as someone who does not react impulsively, someone who thinks before speaking, someone who values peace over ego. And this reputation becomes a form of strength. The difference between reacting and responding. At first, reacting and responding may seem like the same thing, but they are completely different mental processes. A reaction is automatic. It happens instantly. It is driven by emotion. A response is intentional. It is thoughtful. It is guided by reason. When someone reacts, their behavior is controlled by the situation. But when someone responds, their behavior is controlled by their values. This distinction is subtle, but extremely important. Why ego demands reaction. One of the main reasons people react emotionally is the influence of the ego. The ego constantly tries to protect an image of who you believe you are. When someone criticizes you, the ego interprets it as an attack. When someone disagrees with you, the ego feels threatened. When someone challenges your ideas, the ego demands defense. This is why people often react so strongly to small situations. The ego treats every disagreement as a battle, but Stoic philosophers saw the ego as one of the greatest obstacles to wisdom. They believe that true strength comes from understanding that your value does not depend on other people's opinions. When you truly understand this, criticism becomes less threatening. Insults lose their emotional power, and disagreements become opportunities for learning instead of conflict. This does not mean you should accept disrespect. It means you should choose your responses carefully instead of reacting impulsively. Because reacting emotionally rarely improves a situation, but responding with clarity often does. The mental training of Stoic thinkers. Stoic philosophers did not expect emotional discipline to appear automatically. They understood that it required training. Just like physical strength requires exercise, mental strength requires practice. One of their most powerful exercises was something called negative visualization. Each day they would imagine difficult situations. They imagined being criticized. They imagined losing comfort. They imagined facing obstacles. Not to become pessimistic, but to prepare their minds. Another Stoic exercise was daily reflection. At the end of each day, they reviewed their actions. They asked themselves simple questions. Where did I react emotionally today? Where could I have remained calmer? What would a wiser response have been? This reflection helped them learn from their mistakes. Instead of repeating emotional reactions, they gradually developed stronger discipline. Over time, these small practices transformed their mindset. Situations that once triggered anger became manageable. Moments that once caused stress became opportunities for growth. And slowly, their minds became calmer and more stable. How clarity appears in stillness. In modern life, the mind is constantly stimulated. Messages, notifications, arguments, opinions, noise. All of this constant stimulation keeps the mind in a reactive state. But clarity rarely appears in noise. Clarity appears in stillness. When you slow down your reactions, you create mental space, and in that space, something important becomes possible: understanding. You begin to see situations more objectively. You notice patterns in people's behavior. You recognize when emotions are trying to control your actions, and this awareness gives you power. Because once you see the pattern of reaction clearly, you can begin to change it. Instead of being pulled by every emotional trigger, you become the observer, and the observer always has more control than the reactor. There is a type of confidence that does not need to be displayed loudly. It does not need validation. It does not need constant defense. It is quiet, stable, unshaken. This confidence comes from knowing that your mind belongs to you, not to the opinions of others, not to temporary emotions, not to unpredictable circumstances. When you develop this inner stability, people begin to notice something different about you. You seem less affected by drama, less distracted by conflict, less interested in proving yourself. Instead, your attention is directed toward growth, toward understanding, toward purposeful action. This is the quiet confidence that Stoic philosophy encourages, a confidence rooted not in ego, but in discipline. A simple Stoic reminder. Whenever you feel the urge to react emotionally, remember something simple. You are always free to pause. You are always free to think, and you are always free to choose a wiser response. The moment between stimulus and response is where your true power exists. Most people never notice this moment, but those who do begin to live differently. Because in that moment of awareness, they realize something important. They are not controlled by the world around them. They are guided by the discipline within them. One of the most difficult moments to remain calm is when someone disrespects you. It can happen anywhere, at work, among friends, within family, or even from strangers on the internet. Someone says something dismissive. Someone questions your ability. Someone makes a sarcastic remark designed to provoke you, and immediately, your mind feels the pressure to respond. The urge appears almost instantly. You want to defend yourself. You want to prove them wrong. You want to protect your reputation. This is a natural reaction. But Stoic philosophy encourages us to examine this moment more carefully, because in many cases, reacting emotionally to disrespect does not actually solve the situation. Instead, it often makes it worse. The Stoics believe that disrespect only has power when we give it power. If someone insults you and you react immediately, the insult has achieved its goal. It has controlled your emotions. But if someone insults you and you remain calm, something different happens. The insult loses its momentum. The situation loses its intensity. And the person who attempted to provoke you realizes something unexpected. You cannot be easily manipulated. This does not mean you should tolerate mistreatment or allow people to walk over you. Stoicism does not teach weakness. It teaches control. Sometimes the wisest response to disrespect is calm clarification. Sometimes it is quiet confidence. And sometimes the strongest response is simply walking away. Because not every situation deserves your attention, and not every opinion deserves your emotional energy. Why people try to provoke reactions. When someone tries to provoke a reaction from you, it often says more about them than it does about you. People provoke reactions for many reasons. Sometimes they are insecure. Sometimes they want attention. Sometimes they feel threatened by your presence or success. Sometimes they simply enjoy creating conflict. But in every case, the strategy is the same. They attempt to pull you into an emotional response, because when you react emotionally, they gain control over the situation. Your reaction becomes their power. This is why calmness is such an effective defense. When someone attempts to provoke you and you remain calm, their strategy collapses. They expected anger, they expected argument, but instead they receive silence or composure. And suddenly, the situation becomes uncomfortable for them, because the emotional pattern they were expecting never appears. Calmness disrupts manipulation. It breaks the cycle of reaction, and it protects your inner stability. Thinking clearly when emotions rise. Emotions are not the enemy. They are natural signals produced by the mind. Anger, frustration, and fear all have evolutionary purposes. They helped human beings survive dangerous situations. But in modern life, many of the situations that trigger emotions are not life-threatening. They are social, psychological, situational. Yet the brain reacts to them with the same intensity as physical danger. This is why emotional reactions often feel overwhelming. But Stoic philosophy teaches that emotions should be observed rather than blindly followed. Once you observe the emotion, instead of becoming consumed by it, you can ask yourself important questions. Is this situation truly worth my energy? Will reacting emotionally improve this moment? What response would reflect the person I want to become? These questions shift your mind from reaction to reflection, and reflection often leads to wiser choices. The Stoic view of control. One of the central teachings of Stoic philosophy is the idea known as the dichotomy of control. This principle divides everything in life into two categories: things within your control and things outside your control. Your thoughts, actions, and decisions are within your control, but many other things are not. Other people's opinions, other people's behavior, unexpected events, circumstances beyond your influence. When people react emotionally, it is often because they are trying to control something outside their control. They want others to behave differently. They want situations to unfold exactly as they expected. They want reality to match their preferences. But when reality does not cooperate, frustration appears. The Stoics believe that peace comes from accepting this simple truth. You cannot control everything, but you can always control your response. When you focus your energy only on what you can control, life becomes simpler. Instead of fighting reality, you work with it. Instead of resisting events, you adapt to them. And instead of reacting emotionally, you respond strategically. Why calmness creates clarity. When the mind is overwhelmed by emotion, perception becomes distorted. Small problems feel enormous. Temporary setbacks feel permanent. Minor disagreements feel like personal attacks. But when the mind becomes calm, perspective changes. Situations appear more manageable. Problems become clearer. Solutions become easier to identify. This is why calmness is such an important skill. It allows the mind to function properly. When you are calm, you think better. You communicate more effectively. You make wiser decisions. And over time, these decisions shape the direction of your life. Stoic thinkers believed that emotional discipline was not about suppressing feelings. It was about protecting the mind from unnecessary chaos, because a chaotic mind struggles to think clearly, but a calm mind sees the world with accuracy. How practice builds mental strength. No one becomes emotionally disciplined overnight. Like any skill, it requires practice. At first, you will still react emotionally to certain situations. That is normal. The goal is not perfection. The goal is improvement. Each time you pause before reacting, you strengthen your discipline. Each time you choose calmness instead of anger, you train your mind. Each time you reflect on your behavior and learn from it, you grow stronger. Over time, these small practices accumulate. Situations that once triggered strong reactions will begin to feel manageable. Your patience will increase. Your perspective will expand. And gradually, calmness will become your natural state. This is the long-term reward of Stoic practice. Not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it. The freedom of self-mastery. When you learn the art of not reacting, you experience a kind of freedom that many people never discover. You are no longer controlled by every external event. You are no longer pulled into unnecessary conflicts. You are no longer emotionally exhausted by situations that do not deserve your attention. Instead, your mind becomes stable, your thoughts become clearer, and your energy becomes focused on what truly matters. This freedom is not given by the world. It is created by discipline, by awareness, and by the decision to respond wisely instead of reacting impulsively. There is a quiet strength that develops when you stop reacting to everything around you. At first, this strength is barely noticeable. It appears in small moments. Moments when someone says something irritating and you choose not to respond. Moments when a situation becomes stressful and you remain calm. Moments when criticism appears and you observe it instead of immediately defending yourself. These small choices seem insignificant, but over time they begin to change something deeper within you. Your mind becomes more stable, your emotions become less volatile, and slowly you begin to experience a different relationship with the world. Instead of feeling constantly pushed and pulled by external events, you begin to feel grounded. You begin to notice that many situations that once seemed overwhelming were actually temporary. Many arguments that once seemed important were actually unnecessary. Many conflicts that once demanded your attention were actually distractions. This realization creates emotional detachment, not the cold detachment of indifference, but the wise detachment of perspective. You begin to see events for what they truly are, moments passing through time, temporary disturbances in a much larger life. And once you see them this way, they lose their ability to control you. Why some people never learn this skill? Despite its power, the art of not reacting is something most people never learn. Not because it is impossible, but because modern culture constantly encourages the opposite behavior. People are encouraged to respond instantly, to argue constantly, to defend every opinion, to react emotionally to every disagreement. Social media amplifies this tendency. Every day, millions of people argue with strangers over ideas that have little impact on their lives. They invest hours of emotional energy defending positions that will change nothing, and in the process, their minds become exhausted. Their emotions become unstable. Their peace disappears. The Stoics would look at this behavior and see something tragic, because the energy people waste on reaction could have been invested in growth, in learning, in building meaningful relationships, in creating something valuable. The art of not reacting protects your energy from being wasted. It allows you to invest your attention where it truly matters. The power of selective attention. Your attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Where you place your attention shapes your experience of life. If your attention is constantly focused on conflict, your life will feel chaotic. If your attention is constantly focused on criticism, your life will feel negative. If your attention is constantly focused on arguments, your life will feel exhausting. But when you learn to control your reactions, you also learn to control your attention. You stop feeding situations that do not deserve your focus. You stop amplifying negativity with emotional reactions. Instead, you choose where your energy goes. And this choice changes the quality of your life. Because attention is the foundation of experience. What you focus on grows. What you ignore fades. The Stoics understood this deeply. When calmness becomes your nature. At first, remaining calm requires effort. You must consciously remind yourself to pause, to breathe, to think before reacting. But with practice, something remarkable happens. Calmness begins to feel natural. Situations that once triggered strong emotions no longer have the same effect. You begin to observe conflict without becoming part of it. You begin to notice insults without feeling personally attacked. You begin to face problems without feeling overwhelmed. This transformation happens gradually, one moment of discipline at a time, and eventually you reach a point where your mind feels stable even in difficult circumstances. Not because life has become easier, but because your perspective has become stronger. You understand that emotional reactions rarely improve situations. You understand that patience creates clarity, and you understand that control over your mind is more valuable than control over external events. A Stoic story about control. There is an ancient story often told in Stoic philosophy. A man once visited a philosopher and asked how he could stop being disturbed by insults. The philosopher responded with a simple question. If someone offers you a gift and you refuse to accept it, to whom does the gift belong? The man replied, to the person who offered it. The philosopher smiled and said, the same is true of insults. If someone insults you and you refuse to accept it emotionally, the insult remains with the person who offered it. This story contains a powerful lesson. You do not have to carry every negative word someone gives you. You do not have to accept every opinion someone expresses, and you do not have to react to every attempt to provoke you. You are always free to let it pass. The calm mind sees further. One of the greatest advantages of emotional discipline is perspective. When the mind is calm, it can see further into the future. Instead of focusing only on the present emotion, you begin to consider long-term consequences. You ask yourself questions like, will this reaction improve my life tomorrow? Will this argument matter next week? Will this conflict be important next year? Often the answer is no. Many of the things that trigger emotional reactions today will be completely forgotten in a short period of time, but the consequences of impulsive reactions can last much longer. Harsh words damage relationships. Impulsive decisions create regret. Anger creates problems that patience could have avoided. The calm mind sees these possibilities before acting, and this foresight prevents unnecessary mistakes. The final realization. The art of not reacting is not about suppressing your emotions. It is about understanding them. It is about recognizing that every reaction is a choice between impulse and discipline, a choice between chaos and clarity, a choice between temporary satisfaction and long-term wisdom. Every moment presents this choice. Most people react without thinking, but those who do practice Stoic discipline pause. They observe, they reflect, and they respond with intention. Over time, this habit transforms their character. They become calmer, stronger, more stable, and eventually, you reach a realization that changes everything. The world around them is still unpredictable. People are still imperfect. Problems still appear, but their mind remains steady because they have learned something most people never understand. The greatest form of power is not controlling others. The greatest form of power is controlling yourself. And once you achieve that control, very little in life can disturb your peace. If this idea resonated with you, remember something simple. The next time you feel the urge to react emotionally, pause, take a breath, observe the situation, and ask yourself a simple question. What response would the calmest and wisest version of me choose in this moment? That small pause may seem insignificant, but it is the beginning of mastery over your mind, and mastery over your mind is the foundation of a powerful life.